and cold. -4, -5 even in towns and cities, maybe -15 through some rural parts across Scotland. So a cold frosty start to Wednesday, but a wet start in the south. Covering of snow as possible, a centimetre or two as we go through the day. Probably easing for a time across the southeast, but then we'll look at another pulse of wet weather coming into the southwest that could produce some heavier snow during Wednesday afternoon into South Wales, southwest England, and scooting further east later on. Again, for a good chunk of the country, tomorrow's just a sunny but cold day, 4 or 5 the high, not as many snow showers in northern Scotland, but a greater risk of seeing some snow across South Wales, the South Midlands, southern counties of England during Wednesday evening time. We could see 5 centimetres of snow in places, maybe 10 in some spots, particularly high ground. It all starts to pull away as we go through Wednesday evening. One area we're concerned about then, but then another area as this next low comes in further north, the potential for some heavy snow on Thursday and into Friday. Parts of northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Much of Scotland will be dry and bright on Thursday. It's Friday, we could see some snow here, but look at this wet weather. Wales, the Midlands could see some snow on Thursday, pushing into northern England and Northern Ireland through the day and eventually into southern Scotland. In the south by Thursday, it will start to turn a little milder, so it's more likely we'll see rain here. Goodbye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Well, a day of very big pronouncements from the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister. New legislation to stop the boats. Do they really believe in it, or are they just playing a game of politics? The budget is coming up next week. Is there any hope that we can stop the Chancellor putting up corporation tax by a staggering 30%. We'll look at Ukraine, Bakhmut, a salient. Are the Ukrainians right to be defending that position? And joining me on Talking Pints, Duncan Larkham, former royal editor of The Sun newspaper and a man who befriended Prince Harry. I'm going to ask him, what on earth has gone wrong? Could it be the drugs? I don't know. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story tonight on GB News. The Prime Minister has addressed potential migrants to the UK by saying if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum or stay in the UK. Rishi Sunak says the government should be the one who decides who should enter the country, not the criminal gangs. And the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, earlier admitted it's likely the illegal migration bill may be incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, at a news conference, GB News' Tom Harwood asked the Prime Minister if he's ready for any legal challenges.
Already legions of lawyers are preparing to tackle you over this legislation. Firstly, are you up for the fight? And secondly, what's plan B if they win?
Well, look, of course we're up for the fight and we'd be standing here if we weren't. But we're confident that we will win. There's absolutely nothing improper or unprecedented about pursuing bills with a 19(1)(b) statement. It absolutely does not mean that the bill is unlawful. We believe that it is lawful, that we are acting in compliance with our international obligations, and we are also meeting our obligations to the British public.
Sunak speaking earlier. Well, Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, has said today that he's going to stand down at the next election. Sir Graham, who'd been Conservative MP for Altrincham and Sale West since 1997, said in a statement, "Representing my hometown in the House of Commons has been an immense privilege for which I'll always be grateful." In other news today, the trial of the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Corbell has been told she was shot after running downstairs to her mother because she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court heard today that the defendant, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. And finally, parts of northern England and Scotland have been hit by a sudden cold snap, with temperatures forecast to drop to even -15 in some regions of the UK. More than 4 inches of snow fell this morning in northern Scotland, and around 8 inches are forecast for later this week. A yellow weather warning for snow and ice remains in place for most of the UK, with tonight expected to be the coldest night of the year so far. Wrap up warm. That's it from me. I'm back in an hour. Now here's Farage.
Good evening. A big day as Prime Minister Sunak goes down to the Coastal Command Centre in Dover, and in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary outlines new legislation, and then the PM has a press conference in number 10 at 5:30 this evening. The message is clear. The new legislation is going to very clearly say, if you come to this country illegally, with only a very few exceptions, you are going to be detained. Anyone that comes after today, you are going to be detained. They've got ex-army camps and RAF bases where thousands of young men will be kept, and you will then be deported and never allowed to re-enter this country again. They're going to put a cap on the number of refugees that come into the United Kingdom every single year, and as far as the Modern Slavery Act is concerned, that will not apply if you've come to the country illegally. Now, what's my response to that? Well, I was saying this 3 years ago. There I was in April and May of 2020 when a small trickle of boats were coming over the English Channel, and I said it seemed very clear to me that you may as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everybody is welcome because we won't deport any of you. So in a way, I should be welcoming what the government is saying, but I don't, because they even admit, as they put this legislation forward, that they are pushing the limits of international law, by which they mean a variety of conventions that we've been signed up to with the United Nations, but more importantly, the European Convention on Human Rights, backed up by their court in Strasbourg. And this is the most important part that I don't think anyone has talked about across British media today, the fact is that British judges have always interpreted that law in favour, as they see it, of the original ECHR treaty. I don't think any of this is going to work. But I'll tell you what I really think. I really think what the Conservatives are trying to do is to expose Labour. Now, the Labour response to this was, well, where on earth are you going to deport people to if you haven't got any agreements? It was a reasonable point. They also pointed out that the last Labour administration did actually deport tens of thousands of people who were here illegally, something the Tories haven't done. But have a look, have a listen at this short video put out by Conservative Central Office this afternoon.
At least 430 migrants crossed the English Channel to the UK yesterday.
Record number on Saturday, 828 either being rescued.
1,000 migrants have crossed the Channel to the UK in just one day.
The Home Secretary and I have studied every aspect of this issue in detail, and we can now set out 5 new steps today.
Labour will stop this policy. We will campaign to stop it now. We would reverse.
You see, this is all about politics. They know this policy isn't going to work, but Rishi Sunak tells you how impossible the situation is. Doesn't take any responsibility for it, doesn't accept that many of us have been screaming at them over the course of the last 3 years to do something about it, doesn't accept for a moment that, of course, Boris Johnson said if you come here illegally, you won't stay. David Cameron said if you come here illegally, you won't stay. Now, this is all projecting forward. We are on your side. That is what Sunak is saying. Labour will not be able to match this in any way at all, and that's because there's a significant minority within the Labour Party who frankly believe in open borders, believe we are all global citizens. And I'll bet you every penny in Lombard Street to an orange that this is all about the next general election. And the Tories will fight the election saying, we're going to leave the ECHR, or we're going to give you a referendum on the ECHR. And we're all supposed to believe them. Will you tell me, do you agree with me? Is this really just all about politics? Farage at gbnews.uk. Please give me your responses. Well, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Alexander Downer, former Australian Foreign Minister, but more significantly, an advisor to the government on immigration policy, based, I think, Alexander, on the previous successes of the Australians in dealing with this problem. And in good time, I'll come to that. Yeah. To begin, do you honestly, really, truthfully think that we're going to scoop up thousands of young men from the beaches and from these dinghies in the Channel and detain them for 28 days in former army camps around the country, not allowing them to leave the premises, not allowing them to apply for any legal aid? Can you imagine the hoo-ha that would take place in this country from mainstream media, the fact that the Human Rights Act, ECHR legislation would be invoked very, very quickly? I mean, look, I'd love it to work, but do you really think it can?
Well, I think it can. Let me explain why I think it can. That you have a situation where the government has an agreement with Rwanda, and once they can start the process of sending people to Rwanda, then the people traffickers won't be able to sell their tickets, their passages any longer to people to come across the Channel, because they'll know that if they do come across the Channel, they'll be sent to Rwanda, so they'll stay in France,
if
right?
If that was to happen, of course.
Exactly. Why would that... And the legislation, I mean, I've had a quick look at the legislation. I mean, I can't say I've read every word of it, but I've had a quick look at the legislation. I think the only problem, it's good, the legislation, The only problem is going to be this whole, which you allude to, this whole question of what the European Court has. So the government is, as a first step, is going to engage in discussions with them. That's fair enough. They should have done that long ago. But they're going to engage in discussions with them to explain their position. But in extremis, they can legislate to say that under British law, in these particular circumstances, they will not be guided by the European Court. They could do that. They haven't done it yet.
Let me pick up on both those points. Number one, Rwanda. You are prepared to take a few hundred people from us?
No, Rwanda have, and I just checked this afternoon with the Home Office, Rwanda have not put a limit on the number of people they would take, and they could take a large number of people. But the argument here, which is a good argument, and this goes from my own experience dealing with the little island of Nauru, where we in Australia sent people, once the people traffickers know they can't get people into the UK, that they'll just be sent to Rwanda, the flood will turn into a trickle. So you won't need Rwanda to take tens of thousands of people.
That I accept. But the last time we looked at this, Rwanda were prepared to take a few hundred, and there was a clause in the agreement that in return we would have to take people from Rwanda into our country. So I'm not, look, if Rwanda want to take 10,000, probably 10,000 would stop it. Probably 10,000 would stop it. I'm not convinced.
Well, they've not put it. Let me make this absolutely clear to the viewers. Rwanda have not put a ceiling on the number of people they would take.
Okay, fine. And then the idea that British legislation can override ECHR. The fact is, we're part of ECHR on an international binding treaty, and my experience of British judges is they will always rule in favour of international law over domestic law.
Yeah, I think this is a huge problem, and this goes back many years to the whole notion that the British Parliament has decided that foreign judges can have the ultimate say over British laws.
It's going to be a heck of a battle.
It is. It's potentially a battle. So the question here, you and I don't know the answer to this. The question is, to what extent will the European Court decide to take on the British Parliament and, in effect, the British judiciary?
Well, I think they'd be only too delighted. Now, let's just remind people, I had a chat with Tony Abbott overnight, the Australian Prime Minister, who finally cracked it.
Very good man. John Howard first cracked it, by the way.
Yeah, and then it all went wrong.
Then Tony Abbott came and he fixed it again.
But Abbott made it clear to me that in the end, you tried putting on people on the island and all the rest of it, but in the end, you simply towed the boats back to Indonesia. There was no agreement with Indonesia. There was international condemnation. People screamed and shouted, but guess what happened? The boats stopped coming, didn't they?
Sure. And this is the argument that if you had an agreement with... Look, all you need is President Macron, when he meets with Rishi Sunak on Friday, to say to Rishi Sunak, at Rishi Sunak's bidding, I will agree to you just returning these people to France. And the whole thing would be finished by sunset.
Yes, but I'm afraid...
The whole thing would be finished by sunset.
The chances of that aren't very high.
No, but let me just say, nobody here makes the argument about this. I think this is a really important issue. It's not in France's interests, as well as the UK's interest, that people are getting on and making these dangerous journeys and drowning in the English Channel. The French should be, and they surely are, totally opposed to this. And the best way to stop it is to agree to boat turnarounds. But if you do it unilaterally, the boat turnarounds have to happen in international waterways.
Well, the Royal Marines could pick people up on the 12-mile line and simply take them back to France.
Well, but there's no international water between France and the UK.
Well, there is a small separation zone, but it's a pretty narrow strip of water. Finally, Alexander, is today a step in the right direction?
Today is a big step in the right direction.
Yet another.
It's not, yes, yet another. It is true. Don't be so cynical.
Well, I'm sorry, I had the Nationality and Borders Bill last year. I was told that would solve everything.
Yeah, I do think you make a very good point, that let's be realistic about this. The Labour Party has opposed these measures all the way through. And if Labor become, as everybody says they're going to, become the next government, then it'll be a free-for-all across the channel. There's no doubt about that.
It's been looking like one for the last 3 years, is how I would respond to that. Alexander Downer, thank you. Well, you've toughened up the government in their rhetoric, at least, which is a start. But I believe, folks, this is more about politics than anything else. We're going to take a short break. After that, I'll get some of your reactions.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So, your thoughts? Is it just politics? One viewer says, of course it is. It's more window dressing from the Tories. Keith says, yes, it's just politics and nothing will be done. As always, hot air and lies. Oh, Keith, you're even more cynical than me. Peter says, this is the only way that they can limit the damage at the next election. Maybe even get a victory. Starmer has no answer to this subject. Well, Peter, that is absolutely correct. But I'm not sure this Conservative government has the courage to do it either. And I think for Brexit voters, some may remember I stood in front of a poster of a column of young men coming into Europe. I was called all the names under the sun, but I could see as millions were crossing the Mediterranean into Europe, that unless we got back control of our borders, that flood would start to come to us. And indeed, that's what's happening. And I don't believe a sovereign country bows down to a court in Strasbourg staffed by people who aren't even judges. They're jurists, a weird European concept. Now, a week tomorrow, it is budget day. And Liam Halligan, our economics editor, and I have been railing I think that's a
Sound like you.
It's a reasonable description. Railing against this proposed increase in corporation tax. It's going up by 30%. It is the most incredible signal for a country that's just broken free of the European Union, that wants to become pro-business, the most incredible signal. As ever, of course, it's the little guys and girls that really get hurt by this, and yet something very interesting, Liam, has happened over the last couple of weeks. We're beginning to get bigger business voices objecting.
We are. We had BT, the old British Telecom, telling the government straight, we really don't think you should be raising corporation tax by 6 percentage points from 19 to 25%. The first rise in corporation tax in the UK, if it happens, in 51 years, Nigel. Even the CBI, that most herbivorous of lobby groups, they don't want to ruin the chances of the knighthood, old boy. And even they are saying publicly, we really don't think you should do this. And yet the Treasury's wedded to its orthodoxy. Yeah. It thinks it needs to raise corporation tax to convince financial markets that it can plug a hole in the fiscal accounts of this country. I don't think anyone trading gilts in the City of London thinks that raising corporation tax will raise more money. Certainly everyone I know in the markets thinks that raising the corporation tax will cost the exchequer money because of the impact on investment and therefore
look at
growth.
AstraZeneca.
Indeed.
AstraZeneca about to put £330 million into a plant in Cheshire. They're off to the Republic of Ireland. And remind us what the corporation tax in the Republic of Ireland is.
I think you'll find it's half of what we're about to be.
Exactly
12.5%.
Yeah.
12.5%. How do you feel about Northern Ireland? Just over the border, the corporation tax rate will be half of what it is in Northern Ireland and indeed across the UK. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, when he campaigned to be Conservative leader and indeed Prime Minister, just last summer he didn't get many votes, but he did say that corporation tax should be 15%. His previous failed Tory leadership bid, he said corporation tax should be 12.5%. And yet now you have the Chancellor saying we must raise it to 25%. It's actually law. Rishi Sunak announced that this would happen this time last year. It's set to go up in April. And as you say, the really big companies, they can offset, they can move money between various jurisdictions. If you're running, a plumbing business with 50 people, this is going to take 6% off your margin. Many, many companies will fold, unfortunately, with this huge rise in corporation tax. Companies that the states just spent billions of pounds keeping alive during lockdown. It makes no sense.
Yeah, and with voices like Sir James Dyson, one of the most respected business figures,
one of the world's leading inventors,
is saying this is a huge mistake. Yeah. Do you think they might change their mind?
I'm certainly detecting signs that they are thinking about it. It's not. I've been writing about this literally since Christmas, pretty much every week, hammering away in my
railing.
Well, I hammer away. I'll leave the railing to you, Nigel. In my Sunday Telegraph column, saying this just makes no sense whatsoever. Academics now, the National Institute, the most august think tank in the land, almost a sort of annex of the Treasury, that even they are saying there'll be a big impact on investment if we raise corporation tax. They don't want to raise it because then they have to admit that Liz Truss was right. That's partly what's going on.
Yeah,
that's partly what's going on.
They wouldn't want that. Well, we will be, that evening, 15th of March, the budget, Liam and I will be with a live audience, a business audience in Doncaster.
Yorkshire's finest.
And let's hope we have some good news. On top of that, we've, of course, got these additional levy taxes that have been put on gas and oil. And already in the North Sea, we're seeing disastrous consequences, aren't we?
Well, for a long time, oil companies and gas companies exploring in the North Sea have paid additional corporation tax and then a supplementary levy. With the windfall tax that Rishi Sunak introduced last spring, they're now paying 75% on their profits. And again, it's not the big guys that are exploring in the North Sea. It's much, much smaller companies that don't operate internationally. And to put huge levies on their profits means they'll just pack up their bags and go home. That's what's happening.
Yeah, and Harbour Energy already have said, look, we can't live with this.
Harbour Energy is a major kind of medium-sized player in the North Sea. This is part of a broader trend, Nigel. We're losing business because of our tax environment now. We've just seen the mighty Japanese SoftBank, the new owners of ARM, that incredible microchip manufacturer in Cambridge, born and bred in Cambridge, a massive Silicon Fen success story, cutting-edge technology. SoftBank, despite Rishi Sunak personally lobbying them, they're about to list in New York. We don't begrudge our American friends and cousins, of course, but that company, of all companies, should be listing in London. London now is raising like 1 or 2% of the world's new equity finance. 10 years ago, it was 20%.
So the stock market is becoming a less attractive place for people to list. Energy companies are saying they can't live because you pay 75% tax on profits, but if you lose money, well, that's just tough.
That's right.
And you lose money. And there are going to be millions of small businesses with a 30% rise in tax next week. I mean, here we are in Brexit Britain, which was supposed to be about giving people, a bit more of an even break. Do you see any prospects of this Conservative Party once again being about entrepreneurship?
Well, the UK is nothing if it's not an entrepreneurial, dynamic, relatively low tax environment. That's what we specialise in, and we have for generations and generations. But there is now a sort of growing consensus among the sort of Davos man, among people in the Treasury, and even in the House of Commons and at the top of the Conservative Party, that we have to kind of punish ourselves with high taxes. Already, Nigel, as we go into this budget next week, we have the highest tax burden in this country, tax revenue as a share of national income, since Clement Attlee, since just after the Second World War.
Yeah.
That can't be good for business. And it strikes me that the Conservative Party is going to have to completely reinvent itself. Here's a little scoop. At the weekend, I went to see a guy called Nigel Lawson, and I'll be playing his interview with me on my Planet Normal podcast for The Telegraph on Thursday. And Nigel Lawson says he doesn't think Rishi Sunak is going to make his name as a tax cutter, and the Conservative Party now has to completely reinvent itself.
Liam Halligan, thank you. Strong words. Yes, the Conservative Party must reinvent itself on tax, on immigration. Oh, it's a list as long as your arm. Hey, in a moment, we're going to talk about Bakhmut. There's a salient being created in that front. The Ukrainians are determined to hold it. Are they making the right decision as many, many thousands die every week?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The war in Ukraine, well, it's a very, very bloody conflict with huge casualties on both sides. The eastern Ukrainian town of Bakhmut is now pretty much surrounded by Russian forces. For those of you watching television, have a look at this map. And what you see is basically that there is a salient. Yes, a salient means that the Russians have almost surrounded Ukrainian forces, that Ukrainian forces can be fired on from three sides. Those who know their history will know that from 1914 to 1918, the British held the Ypres salient, and a bloody, destructive and awful place it will be. But President Zelensky has had a meeting with his generals. They do not want to give an inch of ground, and they argue that as the Russians launch attack after attack, that the Russians are taking bigger casualties than the Ukrainians are. It is called a war of attrition. It is a pretty horrendous concept. Against that, the leader of the Wagner Group has complained openly and bitterly over the weekend about Moscow. And, you know, he's really asked, what is going on here? Why am I not getting the kit that I need? Is it bureaucracy or is it betrayal? And the Russian army is now being given tank reinforcements, and these are tanks. This is technology going back to the 1950s. So I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you whether the Ukrainian generals are right to hold on to a salient and be virtually surrounded. Maybe they're right. Maybe the Russians are on the point of collapse. I just don't know. All I can say is it seems to me from history, holding on to a salient because of symbolism can be a very, very costly thing to do. Well, joining me is the Member of Parliament for Gravesham. He's a former army officer, and we never know with Adam Holloway. And indeed, the Conservative Party whips, I don't think ever know quite where Adam is. But he joins me right now, live from Kyiv. Adam, good evening. It's wonderful to get these reports from you as you're out on the road. I mean, what do you think, as a former army man, this idea that the generals, the Ukrainian generals, don't want to cede a single inch of ground? Is that a wise thing when it comes to Bakhmut, in your view?
My view is not very important. The view of people like the Ukrainian general, who I've just been with literally 200 meters ago before I came into this back street, it's a view of people like this man that counts. And they say that what's happening is many of their best soldiers are dying tonight in order to defend and hold destroyed territory and destroyed buildings. He put it like this: there are 148 million Russians and there are 30 million Ukrainians. And a theme that recurs time and time again here is that Putin, with no care for the people he's throwing forward, is throwing forward convicts. He's throwing forward people way beyond the bubble of St. Petersburg and Moscow into what's being described as the meat grinder. And as the general and many others have put it, what's happening is they're destroying this night the flower of Ukrainian youth as well. So this thing is, really quite out of hand in that respect. And I think that within the lower ranks of the Ukrainian army, what's happening at Bakhmut, which is in no way sort of key ground, strategic territory, is probably going to turn out to have been a big mistake, actually.
Yeah, I have to say, Adam, I'm very interested to hear you say that, because it seems to me that almost holding on to Bakhmut, which effectively there isn't much of it left because it's been shelled flat. It seems to me that it is very much a sort of show of pride, and perhaps false pride, and maybe straightening the line might be and getting behind a defensive position might be a better thing to do. You've been to Ukraine repeatedly.
One of the principles that one would observe in war is, sometimes you have to bypass things. We probably should have done that at Monte Cassino. So, it's not for me to second guess the Ukrainians. they're the people fighting this war, but certainly to the general I was with this evening, this is a mistake.
Yeah, Adam, final thought from you. I've just come back from the big Conservative CPAC conference in America. And American Conservatives are really moving very rapidly to the view that they can't just go on endlessly giving money and munitions to Ukraine. We ourselves are down to just a stockpile now of 6,000 artillery shells in the whole of the United Kingdom. Do you sense a little bit of war weariness in terms of supporting Zelensky creeping into the West?
I'll come to that in a minute. That would be completely crazy. Look, Ben Wallace is absolutely right. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that we'd be giving ammunition and so on here, but not replacing it into our own stocks. I mean, that's completely crazy, and we've all got to get behind Ben Wallace in this respect. But in terms of waning support for this war, look, this is not the crazy invasion of Iraq or the monstrous war in Afghanistan where we lost lots of lives and spent so much money. This is really different. This is a war in Europe with a guy who does not respect the international rule-based system. And we have got to, whilst confining it to the borders of Ukraine, we've got to give these people all the support we can. And you know what? It's actually much easier because the Americans do not have troops deployed within the borders here. We don't have troops deployed here. So it's much easier to stay for a long time because we're not losing people. We won't have a problem with public opinion. What we're doing, as I said to you over a year ago, if you remember, when I was in the days immediately after the invasion when we spoke, what we're doing is we're giving these people the ability to do the fight themselves. In a sense, they are fighting for us. And I think for us to diminish our support for them would be crazy because it wouldn't help us. And frankly, we owe these people something because they're doing it for us.
Adam, I think given your words, let's hope Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is listening. We're going to have to up our industrial production. As ever, Adam, very grateful to you for reporting to us live from Ukraine. Really interesting. Quick What the Farage moment. For the first time yesterday in modern times, yes, the UK grid, we had to fire up a coal-fired power station in West Burton. Otherwise, there was significant risk of the lights going out because the wind wasn't blowing. And those watching on TV can see the big billowing chimneys coming from coal being burnt to produce electricity in the UK. Don't our politicians talk an absolute load of old nonsense? It's the end of coal, we were told, and here we are now having to burn it. Madness when we could be producing our own gas, which of course lets off far less CO2. More of that another day. In a minute, Talking Pints with Duncan Larkham, man who tried to become a professional rugby player but finished up as the royal editor on The Sun. And he knows Prince Harry pretty well. I'm going to ask him, what on earth has gone wrong?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
It's my favourite time of the day. Yes, of course, it's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Duncan Larkham, former royal editor of the Sun newspaper.
Cheers. Thank you.
Welcome to the programme. Now,
thanks for having me here.
Duncan, the young Duncan, who thought he might become a professional rugby player. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's how I started out. I did a politics degree, but in Wales, and ended up playing rugby for one of the clubs in the Premiership in Wales. But I reached the point where I realised that I may not make a very good journalist, but I am not big enough to be a big bruising rugby player. And I used to spend half my matches in Wales as an English politics student whilst playing rugby, putting on a Scottish accent. I mean, how wimpy is that? So I was far too wimpy for that game.
It is a rough old game, though, isn't it?
It is in the Rhondda Valley, yes. It's
No,
a very rough game.
Where it's almost a religion down there, I think.
It's more than a religion, yeah. It's a way of life, yeah.
So journalism won. And after some local jobs in Kent and Sussex, it's the Sun newspaper. And when you join the Sun, it's still mega, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, walking into the Sun building back then to the newsroom, there was a sign above the door saying "Walk tall, you're entering Sun country." It was when it was back down in Wapping, so the building shook as they printed every paper every evening if you're on a late shift. And it was just as a young reporter going into Britain's biggest, and I believe the world's biggest English-speaking newspaper daily at the time. Yeah, 9 million readers back then. I think I started with 9 million readers, and by the time I left in 2016, I think that dropped down to about 5. So.
I don't think that was all your fault. I think the industry's changed, and hey, we still absorb journalism, and we just do more of it online now than we used to. And the other point, of course, is that almost everyone now with an iPhone thinks they're a journalist. Now, you did defence there for a little bit. I was just chatting with Adam Holloway.
Yes, I saw. Yeah.
You saw that. I mean, defending a salient.
Well, I mean, my time was spent in Afghanistan, and there we had a situation where between sort of 2008, 2009, 2010, all of a sudden what was happening was Wootton Bassett, where they were bringing the bodies back through. Yeah, suddenly where it was maybe a dozen, it would suddenly be more than 100 a year. And I think that at the height of the war, the problem that we had at the Sun was that the public, our readers, really didn't feel like we were at war, but of course we were, and I think it was a real privileged time to do that and to go out and spend time with the troops.
But to see what has happened to our forces since the Conservatives took power in 2010, we just diminished in the most incredible way.
It was the strategic defence reviews at the time. We called them out. We said, but this is cutting back way beyond. The military was saying this is cutting back too far, and of course now, I think that let's say touch wood that we won't come to regret that. But I think the the force that the British military used to be is simply not the case
no,
now.
I think it's awful. But it's as royal editor that you sort of make your name. And it's really interesting, Duncan, the relationship between a royal reporter and the royal family. And from what I can see, your relationship with William and Kate was reasonably cordial.
It was, and I have to say, with Harry as well. I mean, I enjoyed working alongside them. One of the first stories that I wrote was in 2005, and it was when Harry wore that Nazi outfit.
Yeah, in fact, we've got the picture to put up on the screen.
Not that I go on about that all the time.
Harry the Nazi. So you're writing. When there is a young Harry there wearing a swastika armband. Larkham's broken the story. How does he ever talk to you again?
Well, I have to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised because only a few weeks after we'd done the Nazi story, I found myself in a nightclub in Klosters in Switzerland during the annual ski trip that Prince Charles used to do. Yep. There was a very inebriated Harry and a very animated William. I found myself in that. I tell you, I have to complain about Harry's intrusion into my privacy because I went upstairs at one point that evening, and as I was there, a flash went off, and I was in the toilets using the urinal, if that's okay. And I looked round, and there was Prince Harry laughing his head off with one of those happy snap cameras. And there were quite a lot of other people in the toilet. I turned around and said, "Leave me alone, you paparazzi scum." So
he was really good fun.
He was. No, he was. Prince Harry always wore his heart on his sleeve, and he never took himself too seriously.
And you even played football with him. We've got a picture of you playing football with him.
If I wasn't a rugby player, I definitely am not a footballer. But yes.
You know, and there's Harry. He's being playful. He's being fun. Yeah. He was one of the most loved royals that have ever been in this country.
I agree.
And now, I mean, goodness me, Duncan. I mean, the stuff at the weekend, and it seems to me it's getting worse and worse and worse. Basically saying that, you know, smoking cannabis is great, that this hallucinogenic drug has really improved his life immeasurably, admitting to being a fairly regular user of cocaine. I wonder, is it the drugs that... He doesn't look to me like a very good advert for someone taking drugs. I mean, he's lost his family, he looks miserable the whole time.
I was going to say, if he's really that happy now, he has to tell his face, because there's no sign of it.
What's happened to him?
The easy thing would be to blame Meghan, wouldn't it? But I think Harry was always troubled. You could see the anger in him sometimes. And, when press photographers' shutters went off, the click, you could see him actually physically recoil. So, I mean, we didn't just blast in and report on Harry as if we didn't give a monkeys. I mean, you could see there was an angry young... Before he joined the army, frankly, off the rails, young prince. Harry the Nazi story, but also he'd punched a photographer. He'd gone to celebrate the end of a period with some friends. He'd gone to a strip club, which wasn't really becoming of a third in line to the throne.
But kind of young men and soldiers and
the public loved him.
No one cared.
Every time we put him on the front page for the wrong reasons, the public loved him more. Absolutely right. They'd forgive anything of that young lad that they remembered as a 12-year-old walking along behind his mother's coffin. I know. But now, how times have changed. I mean, for year after year, Harry was number 2, only behind the Queen in the popularity stakes on those polls. Now, he's only above his uncle, Prince Andrew.
Is he self-destructing?
It's really hard to say. I mean, with Prince Harry, you see a guy who is so committed now. I mean, he's burnt those bridges. And
his post at the Royal Marines has gone. All of this has gone.
It's all gone. He's now even lost the grace and favour place the Queen gave him as a wedding present at Frogmore Cottage.
Frogs it. Yeah.
Exactly, frogs it. And that's the king biting back, saying to his son, OK, you want to carry on this course, there are consequences, so wind your neck in.
It's sad. Duncan, you were there when the great journalistic scandal of the hacking at News of the World occurred. It then spread to the Sun newspaper. You finished up getting arrested, facing trial. accused, I guess you were accused of corruption, really, weren't you?
It was a very strange one, yes. We had an advert in the paper on page 2 that said, "We pay cash for stories." We'd had that there for years. And then all of a sudden, we were involved in a quite a horrendously long, drawn-out legal process where they were saying it was illegal to pay public officials for stories. I was paying a soldier that had worked at Sandhurst, who would only give me positive stories about Harry and William, who would only say, look, they're not being mollycoddled, they're not coming through as an easy ride. In fact, they're under a lot more pressure than any of the other cadets at the time. 7 years later, 8 policemen at my door, 6 in the morning, raided my house, routed through my 5-year-old daughter's bedroom. Goodness only knows what they were looking for. But that was a sort of spin-off from the phone hacking scandal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was an attempt, I suppose, to kind of be seen at least as a company to be different from how they had behaved, perhaps,
but of course,
at the News of the World.
You're found not guilty, great relief. But we've also had since then the Leveson report, etc. The relationship between the press, politicians and public figures has changed. Is the balance right now?
Well, I saw it change because when I started in 1997, just after Tony Blair had come into power, all of a sudden, when I first started, you'd go down as a local reporter and the PC or the sergeant would open the book up and say, right, chaps, what would you like over tea and biscuits? Very transparent, very, you know, working with the police to try and get the right messages out there. But then you suddenly started having civil servants brought in to be press liaison officers, and we'd never get to speak to policemen. We'd only deal through them. And I think that has, over the years now, and especially, as you say, with the Leveson inquiry, I mean, what policeman in their right mind would want to blow the whistle now and speak to a journalist?
We're not getting the stories we used to get. That's the point I was making.
Exactly. It isn't.
No.
People perhaps maybe don't realise how serious it can be, but in future, when local newspapers and national newspapers are simply not getting access to information, it's the taxpayer that's paying the money to have these spin doctors spin out the information. So you have a completely different dynamic, and it's a different world.
Yeah, I have to say, it is very different. I don't know what the answer is. It's very difficult. But you've had a fascinating career in journalism. What next?
Well, here I am. I'm on the night of Farage. Wherever next, I'm here. Look at the window.
Very guarded answer.
Thank you.
Duncan Larkin, thank you for joining us.
Lovely to meet you.
I have a few seconds left on the show, which means it's time for Barrage the Farage. What have you sent me on the menu today? Kathleen asks, what is the point of a government if it can't make national laws? Why does the ECHR supersede our laws? Because we've signed up, Kathleen, to a treaty. It is international law. And for many British judges, that is absolute gospel, and it doesn't really matter what the Prime Minister and Parliament say. And that is going to be the absolute battle royal that happens with this legislation over the course of, well, between now, I guess, and the next general election. And I think the Conservatives will fight the next election saying, vote for us and we'll scrap the ECHR. That's my view. I might ask a friend of mine about that in a moment. Ryan asks, should Conservatives get behind proportional representation? Of course they should, but they never, ever will, and we'll be stuck with this hopelessly outdated first-past-the-post system where it matters less and less now who the candidate is. The candidate becomes almost irrelevant because we vote for or against national party leaders, which I think is very, very sad indeed. I must, before I hand over Jacob, some quite tough talk today from the government, but the ECHR is a problem, isn't it?
It is, but Parliament is sovereign. Now we're outside the European Union. ECHR judgments are not automatically effective in British law, unlike the European Court of Justice, the EU Court, which were. And so, as with prisoner voting rights, we can, if we choose, ignore the ECHR. And I think that is what will happen now if they rule against our efforts to deport illegal immigrants.
We'll need our judiciary on our side too. But, hey, it's been an interesting day. Jacob, what have you got coming up?
Well, we will be talking about the small boats and how effective that is going to be. And we've got Matt Ridley on talking about whether it was a leak from Wuhan that led to COVID. So lots of exciting things in store.
Lots of exciting things in store. I've just come back from America, where, of course, Trump is saying, I told you so, I told you so. Strange, isn't it? Because he said it, everyone said it couldn't possibly be true.
Well, I think what's coming out with the Hancock leaks and so on is that lots of things that we were told definitely couldn't be true turned out to be true.
Well, I think that's certainly right. Well, I'm done for the evening. As I say, I'm handing over now to Jacob, who's far more entertaining and eloquent than I am. But before all of that, better have a look at the weather. I'm told there's some snow on the way.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Snow and ice warnings are in place for the rest of this week, issued by the Met Office. Check out the Met Office website for more details on those warnings. But here's what's happening. We've got a weather front just brushing southern areas as we go through Tuesday night and Wednesday. And they are likely to provide a mixture of rain, sleet, and in some places, some heavy snowfall over the next 24 hours. So a wet night across the south, snow showers in northern Scotland. They'll be easing, potentially quite icy in Northern Ireland as well, but also icy in the south as this wet weather comes in. In between, large chunks of the country, clear and cold. -4, -5, even in towns and cities. Maybe -15 through some rural parts across Scotland. So a cold, frosty start to Wednesday, but a wet start in the south. Covering of snow as possible, a centimetre or two as we go through the day. Probably easing for a time across the southeast, but then we'll look at another pulse of wet weather coming into the southwest that could produce some heavier snow during Wednesday afternoon into South Wales, southwest England, and scooting further east later on. Again, for a good chunk of the country, tomorrow's just a sunny but cold day, 4 or 5 the high, not as many snow showers in northern Scotland, but a greater risk of seeing some snow across South Wales, the South Midlands, southern counties of England during Wednesday evening time. We could see 5 centimetres of snow in places, maybe 10 in some spots, particularly high ground. It all starts to pull away as we go through Wednesday evening. One area we're concerned about then, but then another area as this next low comes in further north, the potential for some heavy snow on Thursday and into Friday. Parts of northern England, North Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Much of Scotland will be dry and bright on Thursday. It's Friday, we could see some snow here, but look at this wet weather. Wales, the Midlands could see some snow on Thursday, pushing into northern England and Northern Ireland through the day and eventually into southern Scotland. In the south by Thursday, it will start to turn a little milder, so it's more likely we'll see rain.